Do you remember the day of the murder very acutely? Is it a very vivid memory?
I remember impressions more than I do. That's really all I can say about it. There are parts that are very, very clear, and there are parts that are hard to remember.
They call it La Sante, the prison that sits quietly in the heart of Paris, pretending to be just another old building in a city that worships art and beauty. But inside those stone walls, there's no beauty, only whispers, only ghosts. Built in the 19th century, born from the age of concrete and punishment, La Sante became the heart of France's darkness. The name means health, ironic, almost cruel, because nothing healthy ever lived there. Time doesn't pass inside those walls. It stretches, it freezes, it strangles you softly. From the outside, it looks calm, solid. Paris traffic hums by, but behind those gates, men have screamed, prayed, begged, and gone mad. The air itself feels heavy, like it remembers pain. Stories hide in every corridor, spies who vanished, writers who wrote their last words on cell walls, killers who smiled at their verdict. And in the middle of all this, silence, thick and alive. This is not just a prison, it's a mirror of France itself, its wars, its shame, its secrets. A place where time bleeds slowly, where justice turns into punishment, and punishment into something far worse. Tonight we go inside. We walk where the condemned once waited for dawn. We listen to the walls breathe. Because La Sante isn't just a building, it's a confession, written in stone. 1. The birth of a fortress, 1867. It started as an idea, discipline, control, order. Paris needed a new prison, something modern, something efficient. So in 1867, they built La Sante, a cross-shaped fortress with rows of cells radiating from the center, so guards could watch without being seen. A perfect panopticon. From the start, it wasn't meant for redemption. It was meant for obedience. The stone came from nearby quarries, thick and gray, cold even in summer. When the first prisoners entered, they said it felt less like a place for humans, more like a vault for broken souls. The French called it progress, but progress has sharp edges. The cells were small, barely enough to stretch your legs. The windows, tiny, barred, covered with steel plates to keep light out. Days became nights, nights became years. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. The guards didn't talk much. They didn't have to. The building did the talking, and it spoke in whispers, low, endless, mechanical. You could feel Paris outside, music, laughter, freedom. But inside, all you had was the echo of your own breath. They said La Sante was built to protect society. Maybe it did, but in doing so, it also built a wall between humanity and mercy. And once those gates shut behind you, you weren't a man anymore. You were a number, a shadow. 2. Shadows of war. Then came the war, the kind that changes not just nations, but souls. When Nazi boots marched into Paris in 1940, La Sante became something darker than it had ever been. The Germans took over the prison, filling its cells with members of the French resistance. Men and women who once believed in liberty now sat chained in silence. Torture rooms hummed with electric wires. The cries at night were swallowed by the city's curfew, and outside no one dared to ask questions. Execution trucks rolled through the gates before dawn. Sometimes they left with bodies, sometimes with just fear. And when the war ended, irony came for revenge. The same cells that held patriots now held traitors, collaborators who worked with the Nazis. Justice flipped its coin, and the walls watched quietly. They didn't care who was right or wrong. They only remembered the screams. By 1945, La Sante had become more than a prison. It was a battlefield of memory. The resistance called it sacred ground. Others called it cursed. But for the guards who stayed, it was just work. Another day, another set of keys, another soul lost in paperwork. History passed through La Sante like a shadow, always moving, never leaving. 3. Whispers in the dark. If you ask old guards what they remember, they'll say the silence. Not peace, never that, but a silence that hummed like pressure in your ears. La Sante was alive. It breathed through its pipes, its cracks, its iron doors. Prisoners talked to themselves just to stay sane. Some didn't. Some stopped speaking altogether. The human mind doesn't do well in boxes, especially when the box hates you back. At night, the halls echoed with footsteps that didn't belong to anyone. Guards swore they heard voices, men banging their heads on walls. The smell, rust, sweat, bleach, and fear stayed long after the inmates left. Discipline was everything. You followed orders or disappeared into solitary, where the walls felt closer every minute. And yet, amidst all that misery, some found strange peace. They wrote letters, poems, drew faces on the concrete, trying to remind themselves they were still human. Some even said the prison changed its mood, angry during storms, calm when the city slept. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe La Sante really did feel. Maybe it absorbed everything, the guilt, the sorrow, the slow rotting of hope. By the 1980s, doctors started calling it psychological torture. But for the men inside, it was just life, a life that never felt alive. 4. The Guillotine Song. There was a time when La Sante had a special guest, the guillotine. They called it justice, quick and clean. The blade fell, heads rolled, and France moved on. Until 1972, this was where the state ended lives in the name of law. The courtyard became a stage of silence before dawn. Prisoners would wake to the creak of wood, the smell of metal, the low murmur of priests whispering last rites. Some guards couldn't watch, others couldn't stop watching. They said the sound stayed with you, a wet thud that followed you home. The last execution was that of Claude Buffet and Roger Bontemps, one a killer, one his accomplice. After the blade fell, France began to question itself. The age of blood and justice was ending, but La Sante kept its ghosts. Even after the guillotine left, the air still felt heavy, like it remembered. The courtyard remained, empty but haunted. People said at night you could still hear the drop, the gasp, the silence that followed. It wasn't punishment anymore. It was ritual. And rituals, they say, never really die. 5. The Scandal Within, 1990s to 2000s. By the 1990s, the world outside had changed. France was modern, polished, proud. But inside La Sante, time was still 1867. Crumbling walls, cold showers, overcrowded cells. Then came a doctor, Véronique Vasseur, who couldn't keep quiet anymore. She wrote a book, told the world what she saw, men living in filth, rats crawling through the kitchens, suicides brushed off as routine. It hit France like a grenade. The press exploded. Politicians acted shocked, but deep down, everyone knew. They just didn't want to see it. For decades, La Sante had been France's dirty secret, a museum of suffering hidden behind bureaucracy. The government promised reforms, inspections, promises. Nothing changed fast. The inmates called it the cemetery of the living. Guards called it the tomb. And yet no one shut it down until 2014, when they finally said enough. The doors closed, not out of mercy, but embarrassment. France wanted to fix its image, not its conscience. But the damage was done. The stories were out. And the world had seen what La Sante really was. Not a prison, but a wound that never healed. 6. The Ghost Return, reopening 2019. 5 years later, the gates opened again. 2019. Fresh paint, new technology, cameras, clean floors, therapy rooms. The officials smiled for cameras, said the new La Sante would be modern, humane, secure. But anyone who knew the old prison felt a chill, because you can't rebuild a soul. The walls still carried weight. The echoes didn't leave with renovation. Inside those same corridors once walked legends and monsters, Carlos the Jackal, Manuel Noriega, and writers like Jean Genet. Some found fame after release, some never saw daylight again. The guards changed, but the rhythm stayed. Keys, footsteps, silence. Even the smell was the same. Metal and disinfectant and something you couldn't name. Prisoners still spoke of strange dreams. Guards still said they heard whispers when alone. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's guilt. But one truth remains. La Sante doesn't forgive, it only waits. And as Paris glows outside, tourists clicking pictures, Lovers walking the Seine, a shadow sits quietly on Rue de la Sante, breathing, listening, remembering. Because prisons don't forget, they just sleep with their eyes open. Today, La Sante stands like a scar in the middle of Paris. You can walk by it, not even notice. But if you stop just for a second and listen, you'll feel it. The hum, the weight, the memories pressed deep into the stone. A century of fear and silence can't be washed off with paint. It stays. La Sante isn't just a place. It's a reminder of what power does when it stops caring, of what happens when punishment becomes habit. Inside those walls, history has looped again and again. Empire, war, reform, decay. Different uniforms, same cruelty. France calls it progress, but the ghosts don't agree. They whisper still, through cracks in the concrete, through cold air that smells faintly of metal and sweat. For every man who walked in, something stayed behind. Regret, maybe, or just the echo of a name forgotten. And as night falls on Paris, when the city lights fade and the wind brushes the old stones, La Sante breathes once more, quiet, watching, waiting for the next story to begin. Because in the end, prisons don't die. They only remember. If stories like this make you stop and think, don't forget to follow the silence. Like, subscribe, and stay with us. The walls still have more to say.